Good afternoon, Professor. It's my pleasure to have a talk with you today.
Good afternoon, it's my pleasure.
A week ago, it's been the first 100 days as Biden is running the office of the US administration, which is why I would like to discuss with you his accomplishments and also the alterations in American policy, mostly foreign policy. If we speak about his domestical success, then out of 61 of his promises, pre-election promises, he has completed 26, partially completed 32, but not started yet, just 3. So this is a great success for a president, for well, in the eyes of his own population, but I would like to learn about your opinion regarding his success on the global level. It's been more than 100 days now. What would you say is the major achievement of Joe Biden so far?
Well, the central message of the Biden administration was America is back and diplomacy is back, which means that the United States under Joseph Biden commits itself to a leading role in the global system, that the United States sees itself as the defender of what they call the liberal international order. And Biden has demonstrated that he's committed by rejoining the World Health Organization, by rejoining the Paris Climate Accord and several other steps. But the major effort in showing that the United States is back to leading the world was the US recommitment to its allies, both in Asia, Japan and South Korea, and in Europe. We have seen a revival of transatlantic ties on the level of rhetorics. It remains to be seen whether we will have substantial realignment between the two sides of the Atlantic on certain issues like China, Iran or Russia for that matter. But that was indeed something which needs to be mentioned. Another major decision that Biden has taken is the decision to withdraw US troops and by that also NATO troops from Afghanistan and to end what he also called the forever wars or the endless wars. And a third clear and important step by the US, though it came a little bit late, was a recommitment to return to the JCPOA and the commitment to start, albeit indirect, negotiations with Iran and the other signatories to the nuclear agreement of 2015, negotiations that have taken place over the past weeks in Vienna. And the final point I'd like to mention of Biden's foreign policy in his early months is that he has clearly signaled to China and the Russian Federation that the United States will cooperate where it's possible, but it would retaliate or contain or deter where it's necessary, and has clearly also announced that his administration does have a democratic agenda, that it is trying to promote democratic values and human rights, and this of course brings him into conflict with both China and the Russian Federation.
Advantages are usually discussed with disadvantages, so I would ask you to name the greatest failure of Joe Biden so far.
Well, I think that a decisive feature of Biden's presidency so far was not to act as a mediator in the conflict between Israel and Palestine, like previous Democratic administrations have done. Biden turned his back to the conflict in the Middle East, but as an old saying goes, the conflict between Israel and Palestine never turns the back to you. It will hunt you, and this is what obviously has happened over the past 2 weeks with the recent escalation of relations between Palestinians and the Israeli government, both inside Israel and in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. So it's a clear demonstration that the United States cannot simply decide, well, we'll leave this conflict behind us and turn our attention exclusively to Asia. It reminded Biden that this is not a good strategy, and now Biden needs to address this problem, although he doesn't like it, but he has to.
There is certain dilemma of American policy that we could track from the past, that whether U.S. Invading into any conflict or trying to mediate conflict by use of force or by military threats, it is considered by the rest of the world as well not democratical approach. On the other side, there is also an opinion that if there is a major conflict, if there is a crucial problem, America, with its democratic principles, with its potential, with its resources, should basically intervene and settle it. Do you think that there can be a compromise? There can be a certain balance between those two positions?
Well, I do think it's important that the United States recommits to global issues, that it again sits at the table of the major states in the international system, maybe not necessarily at the head of the table. So this is relevant. But on the other hand, I would warn that the United States not return to the time of the neoconservative interventionism or the liberal interventionism of the past 2 decades. This has done harm to states where the United States intervened, in several cases violating international law, but it has also been harmful to the United States. It meant an overstretch, an overcommitment of the United States, and I think Biden's domestic effort to rebuild the United States, to build back better, as he calls it, to increase the political cohesion of the country, to revive the economy and to restore working infrastructure. For all that, the United States needs to show restraint, more restraint that they have shown under Obama or particularly the Bush administration. So a balance between being at the table, discussing global issues, bringing America's influence into debates about solving international problems. Yes, that's correct, but no interventionism. As I've said, this has done harm to both the United States and the countries where the United States has intervened.
The simmering conflict that started during the Trump administration between the United States and China is considered to be a certain milestone at the moment. Can you see any prospects, any accomplishments on the U.S.-Chinese front?
Not yet, and maybe we will not see any success in dealing with the increasing confrontation between the two countries. Actually, Biden has continued a lot of Trump's policy vis-à-vis China. Well, the tariffs are still in place for Chinese exports to the U.S. market, and also the Biden administration has made it clear that it's committed to the security of Taiwan, like the Trump administration has done, and this could become a very serious bone of contention and confrontation between the two sides. The United States has made clear it's opposed to Chinese human rights record regarding Hong Kong or regarding the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region. The United States has even committed to defend Japan's security when it comes to the contested islands of Senkaku, contested between China and Japan. So this is a very clear commitment that also these islands are in the US defense perimeter. So I'd say no, we have not seen any steps by the US to alleviate the tensions between the United States. The Chinese government has also demonstrated that it is ready to enter into this confrontation and to challenge the United States. So there will be some difficult years before us where it needs to be avoided that miscalculation or misperception actually leads to a kinetic clash between the armed forces of the two nations over Taiwan, over the South China Sea and the borders in that sea, and over the security of Japan. I hope that the Biden administration will be reasonable enough to prevent such a military escalation. The same I hope from the Chinese government, but I'm not certain that we will be able to avoid such a military clash.
Just to sum up, we could say that Biden will actually continue Trump's policy regarding China, probably without being as assertive as Trump, but actually trying to establish a more solid strategy against Beijing.
Yes, I basically would agree with what you've just said. I think that what is also clear for the Biden administration, like for the Trump administration before him, is that China is seen as challenging the American-led international order. China, as a growing, a rising superpower, wants to have its share in the international system, wants to have its place, its respected place in the international system. And here the United States sees this as a clear challenge to its power, to its influence in the global system. And here where the United States is ready, both under Trump and now also under Biden, to defend American interests and to defend the Western-led international order against such an aspiring nation as China. I don't see that on the Biden side or on the US side in general there's an openness to accommodate the interests of a rising China with the interests of maybe relatively declining United States and relatively declining West. I don't see that such a policy of accommodation is well supported within the Biden administration or the Washington think tank establishment. But I think in order to prevent a military confrontation between the two countries, such a policy of accommodation, which is not a policy of appeasement, would be extremely necessary and important.
While China is a number one rival of United States, Russia follows it, and there's also been lots of discussions which approach, which tactics Biden would choose concerning Moscow. I don't see any certain united policy coming from Washington directed to the east, directed to Russia.
Well, Biden clearly stated that he sees Russia as a threat to the United States, but unlike China, he does not view Russia as a strategic competitor or strategic rival, but he considers Russia to be a spoiler nation, a disruptive nation, in decline relatively to the growing power of China. Biden has also made clear from the very start that he wants Russia to pay for what Biden considers and calls malign activities by the Russian side, the occupation of Crimea, the annexation of Crimea, the intervention in Syria, the interference, the meddling in the presidential elections in the United States in 2016 and 2020. And for that purpose, the United States under Biden has continued what the Trump administration has already started with or without cooperation with the US Congress, namely a clear-cut sanctions policy vis-à-vis Russia. Biden called the sanctions that were imposed about 5 or 6 weeks ago as moderate and as proportionate. However, Russia has responded harshly with its own sanctions vis-à-vis the United States. And in this circumstance of mutual sanctions, it is difficult to see how the proposed summit between Vladimir Putin and Joseph Biden will be a fruitful one after Biden has indeed proposed to meet Vladimir Putin in the next months, maybe even before summer. And it also, of course, did not help that Biden, I would say, very erratically called Vladimir Putin a killer. Maybe Putin is a killer. I'm sure Biden thinks that Putin is a killer, but in diplomatic relations, you never call the head of state of another country a killer. That's not what you do if you want to have substantial agreements with that other nation. So this was a very poor start of Biden's Russia policy. I think, though, that both sides have an interest in cooperating on arms control and strategic stability, and that will most likely also be the major topic of any summit between the two that might take place in the forthcoming months. So yes, in this respect, there will be interest on both sides to cooperate. There is also an interest to cooperate on climate change, so on health issues, so soft issues of international relations. But I don't see any breakthrough in the relations between the United States and the Russian Federation. I don't see it, and I would agree with you that we don't have a coherent Russia strategy already from this Biden administration. Trump had no Russia strategy, but under Biden, the United States has not yet developed any such strategy.
It's a grave mistake for a president of a country to call or to agree about some emotional statements regarding another head of state. And what would you say about any developments between United States and Ukraine? So is there any alterations on this direction?
Clear security commitment by the United States and NATO to Ukraine, its political independence and its territorial integrity. But as I see it, so far this is more about words than about deeds. I don't see any US soldier or NATO soldier fight alongside the Ukrainian armed forces if a Russian invasion of other parts of Ukraine were to be started in the next months or years. But what we see is a commitment of the United States to deliver more arms and ammunition to the Ukrainian side, and some other NATO countries are following in this direction. So there will be a stronger commitment by the United States to Ukraine. The Biden administration is trying to heal the divisions between the two countries from the Trump administration. But at the same time, we also need to take into account that the Biden administration will continue to press Ukraine on promoting domestic reforms, political reforms, legal reforms, and economic reforms. So the Biden administration will, on the one hand, show its solidarity with Ukraine in its confrontation with Russia, but on the other hand, it will press the Ukrainian leadership to, do further reform in the country.
And for the last question, I would ask you about Turkey. Turkey being one of the opponents of the West, of the European Union, while still being within NATO. There are discussions whether Turkey could be actually an ally of Washington again, a full-scale ally. Is there any chance for Biden to really establish such relations with Ankara?
Well, if Biden is serious about his democracy agenda and his fight against authoritarianism, and he depicts the current dynamic in the international system as a conflict between democracies and autocracies, then he has to also be serious on Turkey. He has to be very frank about the authoritarian policies of the Turkish President Erdogan. According to Biden's view that human rights should play a strong role, will put limits on the cooperation between Turkey and the United States. At the same time, of course, Biden understands that the worse relations between the United States and Turkey get, the more Turkey will look towards Russia, will increase its cooperation with Russia, will threaten to join, for instance, the Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union, and will coordinate with Russia in several conflicts in the North African and the Middle Eastern region, and that of course cannot be in the interest of the United States, and therefore we will see, yes, the democracy agenda on the one hand and talk about authoritarianism, but on the other hand we will also see some pragmatic approaches by the US government towards Turkey to improve ties.
Really interesting to hear about your evaluation of the current foreign policy of Washington, and I thank you very much for that, and I hope, and I'm looking forward to having further talks with you in the future, in the next month.
It was a great pleasure talking to you. I'm eager to have more video interviews with you, and we'll be back, and to our visitors, to our viewers, stay safe, stay healthy. We see each other in about a month.
Yes, and you too.
Thank you.